Good evening, everyone. As you just heard from our good friend and brother, Antonio Montica, who will be the host of the conference, there are a few spots that still remain. So if you have any interest at all in joining us for the upcoming festive board and conference, I would highly recommend that you take action as soon as possible. Brothers, this is a very special episode. This is our 50th episode of our Virtual Masonic Education series. And I don't know about you, but the time sure has flown by to get here. We have discussed and conversed over many, many Masonic topics with excellent conversation, light debate, and great presentations and great presenters. And I assure you that we have another great one here tonight. And we look forward to hearing everything that he has to say. It's interesting. Our channel, since we started probably exactly 3 years ago, give or take a month, has been viewed approximately almost 100,000 times, our channel. There's been over 26,000 hours of watched time in these videos and approximately 3,000 subscribers. So we are hitting a chord, brothers, of those men that are in our fraternity that are seeking more Masonic light. So thank you for your support as we continue and look forward to the next 50. So thank you. And a very special thanks, of course, to all my good friends at William & Ware, Rubicon, and Lexington Lodge No. 1. They are the keys behind the scene that help make all this happen. So there are a lot of hardworking Masons behind the scenes trying to provide excellent information for you. Worshipful Brother Dan Kendall, would you please do the honors, sir, of delivering our opening devotion for our 50th episode?
Brothers, our opening devotion this evening is taken from the 1947 edition of the Indiana Masonic Monitor. Brothers, let's join in prayer. Supreme Ruler of the universe, we would reverently invoke thy blessing at this time. Wilt thou be pleased to grant that this assembly, thus begun in order, may be conducted in peace and harmony. Amen.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Brothers, as you know, our Virtual Masonic Education aims to help us become better men, always devoted to our family, our faith, and our country. May we all come together to learn, to subdue our passions, to discipline our minds, and to improve ourselves through the tools of Freemasonry. Any opinions expressed during this education will be those of the presenter or the participant, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. By participating with us this evening, you consent to our guidelines, and our full disclaimer can be found at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/disclaimer. Protocol has not changed. These are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are more than welcome and encouraged to participate. Please be mindful that anything discussed should be suitable for Masons of all degrees as well as non-Masons. Gentlemanly manners are to be expected at all times. No alcohol, smoking, food, or foul language. No discussion of politics or religion. In an effort to assure that our meetings go as smoothly as possible, we recommend attire for each meeting to be coat and tie. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title or location under your video to identify yourself to others. If you're not a Mason, please type guest after your name. Please enable your video camera so everyone can see you, reduce background noise, keep your microphone muted, turn off other programs to reduce distractions. Brothers and friends, tonight's presenter is Worshipful Brother Adam Kendall, and he will be presenting on Diary of a Masonic Archaeologist, Reflections on History and Preservations. And Worshipful Brother John Bizek, will you please do the honors of introducing our special guest for our 50th episode?
I will. Thank you, brother. Worshipful Brother Kendall is the executive director of the Oakland Scottish Rite Historical Foundation. He's past master of San Francisco's Phoenix, number 144, full member of the world's premier Lodge of Research, the London-based Quattro Coronati, number 2076. He's the editor, too, of Heredom and the annual transactions of the Scottish Rite Research Society. He's a Masonic historian. He was collection manager for the Henry W. Coyle Library and Museum of Freemasonry from 2007 to 16. He's a fellow of the Philalethes Society, and he currently serves as its first vice president. He's also a member of the Society of Blue Friars, and his research has been published in notable publications such as the Journal of American Studies, the Journal of Research into Freemasonry and Fraternalism, Heredom, and of course the Quattro Coronati's publications. This is just barely a quarter of his resume, brothers. So tonight, please welcome Worshipful Brother Adam Kendall. Adam, the floor is yours, sir.
Let me unmute. Okay, great. Well, I will first share the screen. Can I go ahead and do that?
Yes, brother, you should be able to do that anytime you like.
Okay, so let me, I haven't done this in a while. It's like bringing me back to COVID times. Sitting in my library here. This is not my personal library, but I am at work. I was joking with Brother John today because I know you guys know heat, but that's why people move to California, but it's a dry heat. But it is hot nonetheless. And so my AC went out this weekend, which was about 103, and that wasn't welcome. And so we did get it fixed, but I am at work still. So this works out. And I am in, and you'll see photographs of where I work. This is going to be a little bit of a looser talk than I normally give because these are items and ideas that I have that I think, although they have a background in hard history and preservation, et cetera, there are for everybody. And I like to speak to my brothers as brothers, talking about the things we love the most. And Masonic history is something that touches almost every brother, even before he becomes a brother, before he enters a lodge. Most of us have been attracted to Freemasonry from, say, movies or whatever. But, you know, it's mostly the media that Freemasonry has produced, right? The outsides of the halls and temples, the strange symbols, or, you know, we find the degree charts, which have a very unique sort of aesthetic to them. They're almost outside of time to us, very mysterious, and they sort of beckon us. That's sort of how I came to Freemasonry, through various attractions in art and also movies, etc. And then came the literature and whatnot. So this title is A Diary of a Masonic Archaeologist. I am not professionally an archaeologist. I joke about it because I'm uncovering ruins in the halls of old Masonic temples. I am, however, a historian, which is sort of archaeologist light, I guess. Not as exciting sometimes as what we think an archaeologist does, but I'm joking, but I do take it seriously because so much of the fraternity has been packed into warrens in between walls of these halls and temples. They speak to us, and maybe we have an attraction, but we don't know what to do with them. We don't necessarily, in our evolution as a Mason, may not know what they are completely, or certainly we may not have the support. I know that Freemasonry or Masonic education and Masonic history over the years, especially during the pandemic, has been extremely popular. I mean, people were drinking out of a fire hose pretty much during the pandemic. Couldn't wait to get to the next the presentation. But, you know, that's all well and good. And I would never go back to the years when it was sort of a well, let's just say a freak show where people thought anybody who delved into the meanings of Freemasonry, its history, or what they purported to be, you know, the secrets of Freemasonry were considered mystics or weirdos or whatnot, and that this was just old stuff, that you couldn't really learn anything from it. I remember when I first became a Mason, I talked with a brother. He's long since deceased, very nice fellow, but he couldn't fathom why a historian would be interested in the lodge's records. And this historian happened to be he was at the time getting his dissertation, doing his dissertation, And it was on the Jewish population of San Francisco during the gold rush, a very well-established community. And he was tracking a lot of the members of this particular community through fraternal organizations, such as particularly Freemasonry. And the reasons for them joining were religious as well as sociological. Entirely fascinating stratum of history that we don't really consider when we're looking at different types of communities, why they choose Freemasonry. But this brother was very proud. He wants to look at our stuff, and as it was always told to me, well, these minutes are just old and we don't want to listen to them anymore. As if the minutes of today, which I can honestly say have been pretty mind-numbing, are in direct contrast to some of the entries in old minute books. If we ever seek to try to understand why men join Freemasonry in our individual communities, it would do us some good to start with our lodge minutes. I know that's terrible to say for some, but it's true. You really do get a sense of what they were doing. So with this background, I originally wanted to call this presentation to the secret and silent. That will someday be my epitaph or my autobiography. I found it rather cheeky, but it also lays bare the depth of what people believe Freemasonry to be. That this certificate, as simple as it is addressed to the secret and silent. It's very striking, isn't it? But it's a rather plain document. And I'm using this as an example. This is courtesy of the Henry Coyle Library Museum of Freemasonry at the Grand Lodge of California. I rediscovered this in our archive, and I was taken aback by it because it was just kind of pushed away, as many, many documents I've seen throughout my career, where they're in paper bags or they're next to the water heater and stained boxes and humid attics, etc. And we see them and go, oh, these are just papers. How many items have been thrown away because they're just papers, right? So this is for Lodge number 183 in England. And I'm using this as an example, as I will many others, of how we can train ourselves and our eyes to start to understand or try to pick out clues of what might be important. Now, is everything old totally important? Not necessarily, but it should be interesting enough to really regard it before doing something destructive with it. And by the way, the caveat is don't destroy anything, please. But this can become problematic, especially if you're looking at like financial records. I'm not a fiscal historian, but there are people that are. So everything you find in your lodge should be regarded with some sort of importance, and then it can be assessed and directed to the proper person, because there is a person who will love what you have or be interested in it and maybe want to study it, right? So I found this, it's really plain. And it's, from my experience, indicative of a typical ancients document. The ancients, I won't go into the background between the ancients and the moderns, but the ancients tended to have very austere certificates, whereas the moderns were had a lot of flourish to them. But what is this? What is this? I mean, I won't, in a normal audience, I would ask you to answer it just for a second, but it's basically a certificate, a membership certificate, testifying that a man had been made a Mason. His name is John Blade, in a lodge that he had been initiated, passed, and raised. If you look at the dates of this craft lodge certificate, there's another one for Royal Arch, another for Knights Templar. You'll see that it's on the same day. He did not receive his degree dates or his degrees in the same day. It's probably to replace what certificates that had been lost. Okay, there's a new layer. What can we find out about that? And it seems that it was given on this under our hands, under the seal, blah, blah, blah. Can't really see it right now. In the 9th Regiment of Infantry at Valenciennes on this 12th day in November in 1806. Now, this very simple paper that you could easily disregard. Okay, it's got a stamp, it's got a seal, and that's kind of neat. It looks kind of old. Oh, I saw 1806 on it. 9th Regiment of Infantry. This was the 9th Regiment of Foot of the British Army, given at Valenciennes, that's in France. What are the British doing in Valenciennes, France in 1806? This is a certificate from a lodge, a military lodge during the Napoleonic Wars. But it gets better because John Blade and this 9th Regiment of Foot had been imprisoned at Valenciennes. Many officers and merchants who were in the military were given, Valenciennes was home to a prison camp that was not very nice to be in. Few are, but this was particularly famous for being very bad. And some of the gentlemen were allowed the humanity, I guess, to attend a lodge. And this was it. After they were released, the regiment went on to do great things in Canada. John Blade disappears. We don't know what happens to him, but we have a bit of Napoleonic British history that somehow ends up in San Francisco. We don't know the provenance or the continuing provenance, that is who owned it, other than the actual originator. But I love this forever, and it speaks to me in a lot of ways because of to the secret and silent. There were so many silences to those who have previously looked at it. I'm glad that they did not throw it away, but it opens up a whole new world about the depth of our history. Who belongs to our fraternity? It's not, it ceases to be that old yarn of we're just a good guys. Now, I'm not saying that we're a cowled, hidden secret underworld plotting revenge or casting esoteric spells, but this speaks to a very powerful and far-reaching and meaningful organization. And this is what I'm going to be talking about a bit, are the silences, the secrecy and silences in these that we can pull up from the depths of history, even in our own lodges. You know, I used to get a lot of comments when I worked at the Grand Lodge of California, and even here that, you know, I am very lucky to have a career in Freemasonry and to work with things that I love. It's very, I also have a caveat that it's just even rarer for a historian to have a job in the field outside of academia. So, but there tends to be sort of maybe a disconnect that lodges don't have interesting things and only Grand Lodges and Scottish Rite temples have interesting things. This is not true. The reason why Grand Lodges and to some extent valleys have a vast array of things is because people, they have under their belt a vast array of lodges. For the Grand Lodges, that's very simple because they charter lodges under their jurisdiction. But valleys have member lodges, basically. They have their own constituent lodges. So we do collect a variety of items from our brothers, present and past. And then what is this Masonic art? You know, this really speaks to us. I mentioned before being very attracted to old 19th century Masonic art. And then there's from the earlier periods, the 18th century. And I started to really kind of enjoy the idea of a sort of Masonic aesthetic that's based upon wisdom, strength, and beauty. It really captures our hearts, those who are at least attracted to it or called to it. But I would hazard to say that even if a person doesn't want to join Freemasonry, that the artwork is attractive, maybe in a peculiar way, maybe it frightens him. I once had a friend that said it scared him. But it touches a certain part of our soul. And I really love this quote. This kind of guides me every day. A man's work is nothing but the slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened. That is deep. And Albert Camus, great, a world famous philosopher, actually reportedly became a Mason but he was a co-Mason. So whether or not that means anything to you, that guides my day. Having this art and literature speak to me on various levels, and it's up to me to access that, to really feel how it, to, I guess what I'm trying to say is to be in touch with how it makes me feel before I intellectualize it, right? The intellectual part's always taking over the heart for me as a historian, but I have to keep them in balance. Why is it attractive to me? What does it say to me? And then when I find out even more about it through the intellectual part, my heart opens up even more because I've discovered something even more exciting. This image here is one of those great discoveries, and it's not going to shock the world or change anything. But on the days I discover these things or rediscover them for our brothers today, because virtually everything I'm dealing with right now is forgotten. Maybe somebody knew about it. Somebody definitely knew about it in the past, but they are forgotten. And when I rediscover them, I have my own little celebrations. So this is where I work. This is the auditorium at the Oakland Scottish Rite. It is a grand affair. She is nearly 100 years old, built in 1927. There are several rooms in this building. A lot of them used to be lounges. This harkens back to the day when men's and women's clubs abounded. You could go in for well, this was during Prohibition, so maybe you didn't have a drink, maybe. We did find a still in the basement. You would have they had lounges, a place you could eat a little bit, play pool, and then you saw your degrees. They had degrees going on pretty much every week. There was always something for you to do. We had our own orchestra. The Scottish Rite, just like the Shrine, became very, very popular because it offered something for everybody. If you're interested in drama, makeup, its costumes, etc., music, you could be a part of it. And then also, because the Scottish Rite proclaims itself the University of Freemasonry, many Scottish Rite temples, including ours, have their own library, purpose-built. It's not an afterthought of some weird room that somebody gave some money and carved it out and said, this will be a library, and everybody fights over whether or not to make it a meeting room or a library. This is, and I might sound facetious, but these are conversations that kind of come to the fore when I talk about these things. I've been present for many, many arguments. I'm sure many of you have as well on what to do with these libraries. Just because it is a dedicated library doesn't mean we haven't lost it half a dozen times. But since I took over, I've cleaned it up. This was during COVID when I can't say I renovated it. I got it cleaned up and more displays went up. I also discovered that many of the books needed to be recatalogued, and I set about doing that, and also assessed, because we didn't know, we had many rare volumes, and this is the sum total of what brothers believed that the Scottish Rite would teach: Freemasonry, history, civics, philosophy. So these books that they donated in the 19th and 20th century, early 20th centuries, are now rare books. And some of them come from earlier eras, right? From the 18th century and actually older than that. So they donated to the Scottish Rite, expecting the brothers to avail themselves of rare knowledge. And this is not just a library, it's a museum of thought. This is what brothers believed the Scottish Rite to teach. So this is the museum of their own minds. They donated their collections. So you can look into the, a sort of hopefulness of these brothers when they die and they give away or donate their books. So when I talk about finding out the secret and silent of these historical items, we have to intellectualize it. Otherwise, we're never really going to understand what we're thinking and what we're doing with the projects at hand. So what does it mean to think historically? You can see it here on the screen, the 5 C's of historical thinking. And these are the basics you learn in undergraduate historical studies, but they're ever so useful that, they're like the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, strength, and beauty. These are the foundations of your thought processes as you determine a historical lineage for an item. So there's change, context, causality, contingency, and complexity. Change, obviously, it refers to change or a lack of change over time. Yesterday is today's past. The next moment is the new now. And what came before it is in the past. So you might wonder if change needs to be it needs to characterize something different, as in tomorrow being different from today. Change also represents continuity, though, and new technology doesn't spring up out of nothing. There's usually a continuity of thoughts, techniques, materials, etc. As a fraternal historian, I would look at the changes in how symbols are arranged or omitted, or how they are produced, not to mention how paraphernalia is produced through successive eras. I'm basing a lot of these definitions off of a work by Thomas Andrews and Flannery Burke in Perspectives of History. So I didn't make this all up, but I'm basing their definitions and sort of mixing it with my own experience, right? And I hope my over explanations are not boring to you before I get to the good stuff, because I believe that this is essential if you were at all interested in Masonic history. I know that because it is very popular, it is flashy, and there is a tendency to want to go for the flash. But there is a lot of dirty work underneath it, many sleepless nights, a lot of ignominy, a lot of just looking at strange things all alone. So it is lonely work, but it is entirely rewarding when you find something that will blow the minds of your brothers, or put some history back together again, a story. Context helps one understand a story or history. As Freemasonry is not monolithic and has adapted to different cultures and contains remnants of the different eras in which it developed, investigating 18th century Europe or the Americas is essential to understanding how the craft developed. So in other words, you can't just study Freemasonry and not study any kind of other history. It'd be totally useless. You'd never understand anything at that point, I believe. Artworks such as diplomas, aprons, or earthenware, to name a few, can give us context by understanding the artistic styles of the eras. It's not just in Freemasonry, remember. And remember that Freemasonry rarely creates anything itself, it borrows. So that gives us that's not a bad thing. That gives us a whole wealth of culture and history to draw upon. So these artistic styles or photographs, considering how they were made within the context of history, a larger history, will remove us from the abstract into something more tangible. Causality, context change over time, and causality to form arguments explaining past change. History must be interpreted by primary sources that frequently offer multiple explanations for a single event. Contingency, every historical outcome depends on a number of prior conditions, that each of these prior conditions depends in turn upon still other conditions, and so on. The core insight of contingency is that the world is a magnificently interconnected place. Change a single prior condition and any historical outcome will have naturally turned out differently. And then finally, there's complexity. History is not just dates, and it's not just telling stories. It's analysis and it's rigor. History is messy, it's unsettling and often confusing, and it's never an elevator pitch. So there's a test. No, I'm not going to give you a test, and I'm not going to link everything I say and analyze it within the 5 C's of historical thinking, but I wanted you to keep them in mind, because as I describe them, you'll see me using each of these, sometimes interchangeably, sometimes not in order, but see if you can start to think in this way as well. So I am using Masonic objects for historical context. These are an interesting set of certificates. Again, they were in a drawer. I think it was folded up in an envelope too. This is for various Masonic orders belonging to father and son. This happens to be for a craft certificate for Charles Denning and Charles L. Denning, respectively. The elder Denning began his Masonic journey during the early years of the United States in 1809, while the son followed in his father's footsteps in the 1860s. It is unknown if these certificates were brought to California by the younger Denning, if they were donated by a relative, or if they were collected and given to the Oakland Scottish Rite Library. So because we don't have a full provenance, meaning a chain of ownership, we don't know how it came to our particular region. Because we're an immigrant state, we can assume that they did, but it doesn't mean that they actually really came to California during the gold rush. It could be that there have been various collectors within the valley that will donate stuff or find them online as it is now today. Nevertheless, they provide us not only with a picture of an American Masonic legacy, but also one of a single family now seen 3,000 miles away 2 centuries later in the case of the elder Dunning, and over 150 years for the younger. Imagine during the elder Dunning's Masonic activity, California belonged to another empire. We belonged to the Spanish Empire. When his son began his Masonic journey, my little corner of the earth had only been a state for less than 20 years. The New Hampshire Grand Secretary's signature on this 1809 certificate is Lyman Spalding. You see it down here. I can't, it's a little bit, it's on the larger picture. Lyman Spalding, he actually, it's good to research these backgrounds of these names. When I posted it online, a brother piped up and said, "Oh my God, I've got something to tell you about Lyman." Well, it turns out, and it's true, Lyman secured the adoption of the Webb work, Thomas Smith's Webb American work, in 1805, 1806, concurrently with the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, which also had jurisdiction over Maine at that time. So you have even more Masonic history creep out. So this is the intermingling of Masonic and American history at the birth of a nation, really. So this is one of my favorites. Let me get to the proper page because I rearranged everything and I didn't put it back in order again. So here we go. I have to use notes sometimes, otherwise I forget the most important things. And I get so excited, I will forget things. So this is one of my favorite things, looking through old books and figuring out anomalies. We have tons of old books that have never really been regarded or evaluated, maybe fits and starts, but never anything with any kind of commitment. And that's part of the history of Freemasonry in the United States, is it not? Where we have an interest that goes through fits and starts. And so you'll have a young upstart that will start cataloging everything, and then burns out, and then it stops, the project stops. And that's sort of what we've suffered from as well. This is an interesting book in that pulled it off the shelf and started looking at it in the frontispiece. What you see here on the left, with this sort of alchemical pseudo-Masonic engraving, was the frontispiece for this other book in German, Die Offenbarte Freimauern, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically the revelation of Freemasonry and the discovered secrets of the Pugs. We'll get into that. But it's not the right frontispiece. And so it turns out that this book was in fact 2 books that had been rebound. We don't know at one point, probably in the 19th century, and most likely from its donator, who stamped his initials on the title page, Charles E. Gillette. He's one of the founders of the Oakland Scottish Rite. So here's the book as it presently opens with this incorrect frontispiece. Now we could just leave it like that. You would never know had I not discovered this. And this is not tooting my own horn, and this is not to minimize it. You know, you could say, well, I don't care. It's just a frontispiece that's been misplaced for an older book. But it's important to know where these errors take place because they can give you the wrong impression of history. If you're not extant in this type of history, it can give you the wrong impression. And that maybe at the very least you see it and go, oh, well, they're showing some mysterioso secret of Freemasonry, and it's somehow related to this secrets of Freemasonry and the Order of the Pugs. When in fact, it's something better than that. It's actually the frontispiece to the book that occurs later on. This frontispiece has its own history. It's shown up in several other books reproduced. It's an alchemical design by Hajano Gogenis, Nugier, that was intended to be a frontispiece for Der Compass der Weisen, which is the compass of the wise men, 1779. And at the right is the correct title page to accompany the Nugier frontispiece. So this Compass der Weisen is actually also a very famous book. So let me fix this. Okay. So the dedication page and then that small engraving you saw earlier on. It's by it's pseudonymous. It's by Katemia Vera. And that was a pseudonym of Adam Michael Burkholz, who lived from 1746 to 1818. So according to his entry on the website Hermetic Library, Burkholz studied with Adam Friedrich von Seinsheim and Christian Knorr von Rosenroth in the minoris or 5th grade of the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross, or the Orden der Gold and Rosenkreuz. This was a very famous pseudo-Masonic alchemical Rosicrucian group, a very seminal group who believed that they had discovered the true Masonry. What group hasn't, right? So this is during a very creative state in Freemasonry where not only were they creating new rites and practicing them, but everybody had discovered the most ancient secret of secrets and the correct and true path of Freemasonry. You look to any rite or ritual of Freemasonry during this time, they're all kind of proclaiming the same thing. So in the dedication, Burkholz, who is writing as Vera, is very sympathetic to the Orden der Golden Rosenkreuzer, which was, I've already described, but by the mid-18th century, the order claimed to have invented Freemasonry. So that's quite a jump from finding the true Freemasonry and moving on to creating it. So he basically dedicates it to the Golden Rosenkreuz, and with the most gratitude to the brotherly loyalty, love, and work as a true brother of the Rosy Cross. So this fits in with a sort of kind of overlap with Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, etc. So which is why this book is so important in Masonic history, but also that we have it in our collection. Let me go back a little bit. And the fact that somebody collected it and found it important. So by going through each page, you can find new reasons for it to be not only in your collection, but how it was produced, who produced it, and their own histories. So books are histories within histories. Everybody who wrote something will have their own motivations for doing so. So just because it's printed doesn't necessarily make it true, but that's elementary, really. You can find truths within it of why they would produce such a work, what they believed, what they wanted to believe, what they wanted you to believe, what they wanted you to study, how that connected or overlapped with what you were studying at the time, what was popular at the time. Because remember, Freemasonry borrows. It borrows from the ancient past. So does Rosicrucianism. This attraction to a golden age of history, that really didn't exist, but is flavored by the past. what we believe the past to be. And we create these new truths, drawing from what we believe the ancient past to be, and blending it with our own problems, our own hopes, and our own desires. This is what these books are. So I said we'd get back to the Order of the Pugs. It's one of my favorite organizations. It's not Masonic whatsoever, but it is modeled on Freemasonry. It was a Catholic order, and it was created by Catholics, some who had been former Masons. They were reacting to the first papal bull against Freemasonry. And so they created their own fraternal order that has a lot of similar iconography as Freemasonry, but it centers on the pug dog, the tiny little French bulldog, the mopes. And so they would have their own initiations, and the initiate would receive a toy of this dog. It represented fidelity and love and compassion. So moving on, we have one of our founders, Major Edwin A. Sherman, 33rd Grand Cross. He was one of those individuals that you have to get to know, not only to understand the Oakland Scottish Rite, but to understand, I believe, 19th century Freemasonry, because he's somebody, I like to joke that he's an individual that only the 19th century could produce. He's one of those guys that traveled across the United States by land on a horse to go hit up the gold rush. He actually made a little money, which was pretty rare. He was a Mexican-American War veteran, nearly died at the siege of Veracruz. It was said that he walked with a gait because he had received muscular damage from the windage of a cannon that passed between his legs. How lucky is that, right? This is the guy, you look at his face and you kind of know that he could be probably pretty funny if he got a little whiskey in him, but you wouldn't want to get on his bad side. And if you were Catholic, you definitely didn't want to be on his bad side, because one of his traits was he had an obsession with anti-Catholicism. It kind of moved him, and he believed that Freemasonry had a part in removing Catholicism from at least the Western world. So he was involved in a lot of dodgy politics prior to the Mexican Revolution in Mexico. He was also the Grand Registrar of the Grand Consistory of California, and an amateur artist and a ritualist. He wrote his own rituals for his own organizations. So some men found gold, some men found politics. He found fraternal orders where he could be the man. So he created his own organizations. He was also secretary of the records of the Mexican the Mexican War Veterans Association. So we have this in our possession, and this is not Masonic, but it is gold for historians to see a Veterans Association's minutes at, not too much, I mean, it's in 1908, but that's technically not that much further from that war, and how they were a mutual aid society, how they admitted each other into the ranks, how they expelled each other. Here I've highlighted a person who was being voted in, recommended by Major Sherman, because he was, this person had been one of the Bear Flag Party members. And this was a movement in California history where it was Americans who, deciding they had enough of the Mexican rule, revolted and took possession of the garrison at Sonoma, arrested General Vallejo, and proclaimed California its own republic, which lasted for 2 weeks, and not realizing that the United States had declared war against Mexico. So it was very short-lived. However, very seminal moment in California, or in the American period of California. This unfolds within the life of Sherman. He also was, everybody here at the Valley, and he did the escutcheons, or coats of arms, for Gethsemane chapter of Rose Croix. In here are our founding members, but if you are to look at context and causality, etc., you're able to see history unfold before your eyes. these are just not just names, these are names of mayors and governors. Nathan Weston Spalding was a governor of California, or mayor of Oakland. He was a founder of 2 lodges, grand treasurer of the Grand Lodge of California, assistant U.S. treasurer, had been appointed by the president. So he was a big man in a growing state. There's also others such as George Cooper Pardee, who was not only mayor of Oakland, but also governor, very larger than life man. August Lewis Ott, who I'm still trying to research him. What I liked about this was how Sherman designed the escutcheon. So you basically had a template that Sherman drew himself. And then, like mark books you've seen for mark lodges, you're able to choose your symbol that you like the most. And it should be kind of heraldic in character, but they take a little bit of liberties with that. Sherman is drawing in influences from European Masonry, and particularly the Swedish Rite and European Scottish Rite, where you should have your own coat of arms as a Knight Rose Croix. Ott here, you can see his name with the Ouroboros and the 2 T's that are taus. Very clever. Simple, but clever. This is Sherman's printed description of what this is, how it should be done, and how much he was charging you. Because you do have to make money on this. And he charged $5. He was also a creator of several other organizations. This will be if I can really get some downtime outside of Herodom and all the other stuff I'm doing right now, I have the rituals that have never been published for this Knights Commanders of the Sun. This is a sort of Praetorian Guard to the Lincoln Guard, of which he was captain of. They would perform mock funerals every year for President Lincoln. Sherman was obsessed with the president, or the deceased president, calling him America's martyr, and was convinced that the Jesuits had assassinated him. And so this is not a Masonic organization, but it's initiatic, and he takes you through different times, different personalities that are important in Protestantism, extraordinarily anti-Catholic, but almost in a hilarious way. And I don't mean that flippantly, where he's using stereotypes and prejudices that we find, well, they're pretty incorrect, but they're almost caricature-like. So you can almost laugh at Sherman being, sweating as he's writing these things down from his own perspective. You really get into his head of his own personal peaks and prejudices. And this is why I like studying this. It's not that it's a difficult subject, because, when you have religious conflict, that's never a laughing matter. However, the people that really propagate it have their own histories behind it. They have their own motivations, and you start crawling into their heads, and you're able to, sort of not only become friends with them, but also find them a little bit odd sometimes. And you wish you could actually meet them. And so this is where you start. Context is not just what else happened during that time. It's finding out what was inside that person who created it, because it didn't come from nowhere. And so this is what I was talking about. This is a mock funeral for memorial services for the Lincoln Grand Guard of Honor, of which he was managing. And it says KCS there. It doesn't have any other real reference to their full name of the organization, but it says the Commandery of Sorrow and in the ritual of the 3rd degree. Well, it's not the 3rd degree of Masonry. It's the 3rd degree of the Knight Commanders of the Sun. So stay tuned. I've found the ritual in, I won't tell you where, but I found the ritual in 2 different locations, and then their bylaws in another. So it's been a fun little search for me. If you ever want to hear about Sherman, or learn about him, a lot of what we have here at the Oakland Scottish Rite was written about by J. Kinney in Herodom, number 12, called Tales from a Trunk. Edwin Sherman, a Masonic Whirlwind. I am in the inheritor of that trunk. And what's fascinating, or what's going to be fun about this research project, is I'm able to build off of someone else's work. Well, one, I don't have to redo a biography of Sherman. However, Jay mentions the Knights Commanders of the Sun, but doesn't go into any other detail. I have that detail. And this is fun for historians. And it's actually an honor to be able to pick up. I'm a great fan of Jay's work. So it's a great honor to be able to pick up where he left off. Every person who works in history, even if you're just working in the closet of your lodge, having continuity with your work, having the pride when you may not be able to figure something out, but someone else does. There's no shame in not knowing enough, and there's no shame in letting things go. But there's a big shame if you drop it and nobody else is there to pick it up. Lastly, this is one of the new things that I've been having fun with. One of my secret fascinations is Egyptian Masonry. Not that I think that Freemasonry comes from Egypt, because it doesn't, but I like how Masons and other organizations have taken the trappings of Freemasonry, and it kind of it's from earlier eras of the fascination with the rediscovery of the ancient world, with Egypt in particular, and also Egyptian Masonry with Cagliostro, etc. These are echoes of that in a Franco-American context. So the Rite of Memphis has come over to the United States in the late 19th century, 1860s, 1870s, via France by Marconi de Negre. It's basically turned into a high degree system, one of several that are competing with each other, including the nascent Scottish Rite, which is still a very, very, very small organization. And in this time period, Albert Pike is running it. So he is definitely the powerhouse behind it, Albert Pike and Mackey. Harry Seymour is well known to them, who takes over the Rite of Memphis, because Harry Seymour was a Surnoist, and not to be outdone by the Surnoists, but he was an irregular Surnoist. So he started a Supreme Council of Surno that was already a regular to Surno, the Surno Supreme Council. So he had a very dodgy Masonic background. I believe he was from New Jersey or Connecticut. He had an acolyte, Calvin Burt, who, when the Grand Orient of France took over the Rite of Memphis and they reduced the number of degrees from 96 to 33, which really did, as you can guess, did not please the Scottish Rite one bit, especially Albert Pike. Not only that, there was a tendency for the Rite of Memphis to get into the wrong hands, and they were selling degrees, and it was more of a certificate club and also a cool kids club for those who had attained advanced degrees and titles in Grand Lodges and Supreme Councils. So it was a laurel leaf for a lot of them. So they reduced their degrees to 33, kind of compacted them. Calvin Burke, not to be gainsaid, said, no, I'm going to do it the traditional way. So we kind of joked that that was his TO Rite of Memphis, because he kept the 96 degrees. He was in Chicago, and he proceeded to create a sovereign sanctuary and charter kind of the divisions that would create the government of his 96 degree Rite of Memphis. It did get into California even. That's a whole different story. But he tried to spread it throughout the Midwest and the West Coast, whereas Seymour had the East Coast. One of our third Grand Master, Benjamin Hyam, had relocated to the East Coast and became associated with Harry Seymour. Being originally from England, Hyam traveled to Manchester to give basically the powers potent to a very young Mason named John Yarker, who not only is famous for some of his more mystical writings in Freemasonry, became sort of important in the occult revival of the late 19th century. So with that background, Hyam was disgraced because of some of his controversies here in California and his association with the Rite of Memphis, to which the English called it that bastard rite. That was a quote from one of the Masonic magazines at that time. This is dedicated by Calvin Burt. See, Calvin C. Burt, 96 degree, to W.P. Innes, Grand Secretary, Grand Lodge of Michigan. William P. Innes was the Grand Secretary, but not only that, he was a very famous engineer for the Army, fighting in the Civil War, and other deeds. Because of time, we will not go into the great deeds of William Innes, but he was not a slouch. And so just from looking at this book cover that's incidentally coming off the rest of the book, we could easily say, well, this book is messed up. There's an inscription. I have tons of these kinds of books where they're inscribed by famous people, and just ones that have faded from our memory, right? That don't have, where seemingly no relevance at this time. It's up to us as Masonic historians to rediscover or recreate that potency of interest, because some people will say, well, I don't know who that guy is. Well, it doesn't mean he's not important. It's up to you to tell that story of why he is important, why this matters, why this messed up book is actually a collector's item. How did you get it even? You should be proud that you have it at all, because these books, these items, when they're gone, they are gone, and they're only here because someone let them be here, right? I've been told several times, well, you can get rid of this and we'll just get them, we'll get more of them. Well, how are you going to get more of these books? I beg the question, how will you get more of these books? We discovered in our own library, and this is probably a very incorrect assessment, but we have nearly $1 million in books, and it's probably more than that, just in books. So this is just a taste of how my thought process is. I didn't get into preservation because that is actually a learned skill. It's a science. I didn't study preservation, but I've learned over time. There are groups such as the MLMA, the Masonic Library and Museum Association, which you should definitely avail yourself of membership. They are a collection of professional museum curators, preservations, etc., that can go a long way in helping you determine what is right. Each item requires its own type of preservation. What's important for you now, the first step in preservation is to know what it is. Then examine it, write it down, and its condition. Being careful to not return it to the same lousy state it was in before. So you want to get, some acid-free boxes, et cetera, stabilize these things. That's the most important thing. But as a historian, I look towards first understanding what it is and its relevancy, and seeing what else we can do with it, how we interpret it, how I can use it to inspire brothers, because they didn't live during this time. Why should they care? Well, as a historian, it's my job to use context and causality, change over time, to describe, fit our brothers into the narrative, why they should care. Because we could say, well, you should care because it's history. No, why should you care? Because we are here because of them. Freemasonry is interesting because it's not a birthright. It's not an accident of birth that you're a Mason. You join of your own free will, but then by doing so, you become an inheritor and a conservator of this history. So why abuse it? Why not try to understand it, and to understand how it can make you better along with Freemasonry's glorious tenets? So with that, I'm going to leave you, and you can have questions and whatever else. I really appreciated talking to you today. It was, wish I could be there in person, and maybe someday I can come back.
Thank you, Worship Brother. Excellent presentation. In fact, you began to elaborate on a very simple, basic question I was going to ask, which is, why is history important? Why is Masonic history important? And you answered that there in your very last comments, which may sound like a juvenile or elementary question, but it's actually quite important. So
yeah,
thank you.
I agree. Thank you. And I like that, because one should never think that these simple questions we may have, they're not simple. I mean, they have very few parts linguistically. Why does history matter? It's only a few words, but boy, you want to sit down and we'll talk about it all night long, right?
Right. Right.
So I think it's such an important question, and I thank you for asking it.
And I think we take it for granted. You know, it's like we got here by accident. No, it was a progression of actions. I have a question for you, and then if anyone else would like to jump in, actually, I'm going to take the screen back if you don't mind, brother.
Sure, yeah, go right ahead.
So if you want to, please,
I'm sorry.
share your screen. There we go.
How do I do that? So like, how do I do that? Oh, stop share.
There we go. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so the first question I have is again, I think a pretty maybe simple question, but I'm very curious to get your take on it. You said a few times that Masonry borrows from many other sources. Could you just elaborate on that? Because I think that's pretty fascinating, and that's something that I haven't personally looked into too much, and I'm actually very curious to learn more about that. But where have you seen Masonry borrowing from? Some of them are more obvious, and are there any patterns with that? And just talk a little bit about that, please, if you don't mind.
Well, that's another lengthy discussion, but Freemasonry, from its symbolism, it borrows from the trades. Some of the more overtly spiritual or religious symbols are borrowed from other sources. The philosophy itself isn't necessarily unique to Freemasonry. It borrows from a variety of different sources from where Freemasonry gained traction. So you're dealing with early 18th century political divisions in England and also abroad. This sort of pre-Enlightenment and Enlightenment era philosophy that develops alongside it. The ideals of a, sort of I'm not going to say democratic, but, the choosing your own future part of democracy that is borrowed from other philosophers. And so it's inspired by the times it lives in. The Egyptian Masonry is a great example of borrowing, wholesale borrowing as well from other sources. Namely, one famous source, there's, oh, I just lost it. There is a famous, well, not famous, but it's famous to those who love Egyptian Masonry, is a book that was originally to teach young men. There were several of these books that would teach young men, particularly those of land, of money, not to be jerks in life, and taught them morality, etc. They were called Bildungsroman. And this one book, and I just, my brain just dumped. So it'll come back to me in a second. Was very instrumental in early Egyptian Masonry. So borrows almost wholesale from it. There are other examples I can give. So Freemasonry, oh, well, okay, the Scottish Rite too. And it's, it and a lot of other high degree systems that use a peculiar form of Christian mysticism, alchemy, Hermeticism, etc., as its sources. Is it these things? It borrows from them and it gives someone an instruction in them, right? It doesn't come from a definite source. It borrows from that time, and this is reflective of the era in which it grew, right? It borrows from the people who made it, right? They're interested in these sorts of things. And so these creators, Freemasonry is created by human beings, and they are influenced by they have their own fascinations, influences. And some of them have been able to create coherent rites or rituals that become popular for others. Others have kind of fallen by the wayside, right? But so that's what I mean by that.
Sure. No.
Did that answer your question? Or
yes, it did. Yes.
Okay.
Brothers, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat bar. You can raise your virtual hand, and I can call on you. So if you have any questions or comments, this is a great time to do that. Worship Brother John Bizak, I believe you said you have a question.
I do. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Adam. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
When you were at the Coyle Library, I'm very familiar with your work there, but you were there for over a decade. And now in Oakland, where I'm not as familiar with what the Historical Foundation has, what did you find the public interest in the Coil Museum to be, and is there an interest from the public in Masonry through the historical foundation today?
Yeah, wow. We had at the Grand Lodge so much in our archives that it was with the space that we had for the museum library, which was very small. I used to joke that it might be small, but it's extremely well stocked. But like the finest wine cellar, and that's how, you know, not to make a joke about it, but you had to really choose wisely, and because I wanted to put everything on display. But what I found general people were interested in was aprons. They love aprons. And then also Masonic artwork, and because they want an idea of what it means, right? So I did a lot of, in fact, I had an exhibit, and you can see them on YouTube. If you go to Masons of California, there's one on the Masonic apron and on Masonic artwork and on the holy writings. All of these, although those videos corresponded with an exhibit that I had done. And we felt that that would be the best way to get more people interested in what we were doing, you know, have almost like a virtual exhibit. But the two most popular were the ones on the Masonic apron and the artwork of Freemasonry. Degree charts, tracing boards, models of those little lodge room models, etc. What I loved about it also, I know that there's been several trends in Freemasonry over time. I've been a Mason very small time in my life compared to some, and a bit more than others. I'm going on my, I think, 29th year now. But I've been, during that short time, I've been privy to see some trends in it. Some I agree with, some of them I can be a little bit cynical sometimes, but I know that you don't want to belabor the point or overload people with all sorts of stories. You know, they'll blank out because Freemasonry can be very, very complex. So in that respect, I understand why someone would say, cook up an elevator pitch. However, if you have someone who is genuinely interested, you can learn how to speak about Freemasonry in a short enough time where they walk away having learned something, but you haven't completely, taken away their entire evening. I loved doing that. When people came into the museum, they genuinely wanted to know about us and something more than a slogan. And maybe their grandfather was a Mason or their father or whatever. They were just interested themselves. And when they walked away, seeing not just slogans or, just a story about Freemasonry and pictures of people, brothers shaking hands and whatnot, they actually could see that there is an entire culture to it, a fraternal culture that overlays the culture that we're all used to, the everyday culture. It truly is a world that exists beyond a portal, sort of like in the Popeye cartoons, where I think it was the Sinbad one, where he goes into a tent. It's this tiny tent, but then he goes inside and there's this palace, right? It's sort of like that. And so I really enjoyed showing people Freemasonry in context. That's the best way I could put it. And they would walk away knowing something way more than they expected, but also I could sense that they were grateful because they got something that wasn't BS. There's a lot of extra sauce that's put on Freemasonry through either the, History Channel, or I don't want to pick on Dan Brown, but, the trends that center around Freemasonry. It doesn't necessarily have to be the authors themselves, but these cultural trends, this pop culture that can be fun sometimes, but it's too much extra sauce, and it muddies the waters, and you do not get a sincere and direct explanation of Freemasonry. And one that actually shows it for what it is. It has its problems, it has its real people and weirdos and scoundrels, and just as much as all the good guys, right? It's a fascinating tale that is way more interesting than all of the conspiracies or the yarns that we ourselves propagate, which are in fact products of layers upon layers upon layers of popular culture through the ages. So back to the story. I was actually at the Grand Lodge of California about 14 years and ran the library museum for 10, then took a break because I moved down to Southern California. And then I came back up to the Bay Area. So this is something kind of radical where there have been building preservation schemes throughout history for Scottish Rite or for lodges. And I'm using the Britishism that sometimes slips out. I'm not British, but a scheme is a plan, right? Not a a dark thing. But they what we're doing is different. In that I don't know if other valleys have done this, where we take the building itself as a historical preservation project. It is, in fact, a museum. Just as much as the library is a museum of thought, the building is a museum of fraternity. It reflects the attitudes and desires of the brethren in a particular time, what they wanted out of Freemasonry. And in fact, with our building, this is a brag, but it's a justified one. When you walk into the Oakland Scottish Rite Temple, which I think is probably the most beautiful Masonic temple on the West Coast, that's probably arguable, but let's just keep it in California and I can be safe. We're one of the largest. And there are some beautiful ones, but they're few and far between now. And this is one of the largest. And when you walk in, many people have said this too, this is what you expected a Masonic building to represent. It is Freemasonry to you. It's not, I know that there's the stories of where you can, we can meet in my garage. That's cool. Austerity is sometimes, humbling and everything, but that's poverty, especially when we have such power in the fraternity still. There's not just money, but the intellectual power we have, the wherewithal to do things, to organize people, to strip away all of the layers that hold us back, which is why fraternal organizations, especially on any frontier you can name in the United States, has been able to organize people faster than any other groups, because it's sort of meta. It doesn't deal with religion or politics, just on who we are as people. So that's what I concentrate on with the historical foundation. I'm busy right now trying to organize not just the brothers, but get the interest of the city to reestablish us, reintroduce ourselves to the city, because they know about us. Everybody, we have events here all the time, but we don't talk ourselves up like some of the other historical buildings. I want to join that community, and it's been a very positive one. We just need more of it, because we do need donors. We've got a mountain of issues, because this is, the building is nearly 100 years old. It's not made of marble. It looks like it is, but it's made out of cement and plaster and architectural styles that just don't exist anymore, but whisk you away to a different time. I'm trying to show people that it's not just a funky old building, which is how some people have described it. Let's rephrase that. This is a building that was important in our community. This is a building that represents the high point, the 20th century, one of the 20th century high points of at least Oakland and the Bay Area. It shows Oakland not just as a historically troubled city, it's more than that. And the residents know that. The native Oaklanders know that. But it shows it as, this is Oakland as it can be, right? This is our heritage. I deal in the past, so I rarely speak of the future, but I do think that the future is when they walk out of that building and they say, God, I really am proud of what people have done here in my town, right? So
Thank you.
That's what we're doing with the foundation. So it's multifaceted. It's many fronts that I work on.
Always
Right.
an
I'm trying to
interesting
learn
answer,
how to.
Adam. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Always an interesting answer. Thank you.
I kind of went off in a lot of
Yeah.
different directions, but that's how I mean, maybe there's not a lot for, I mean, there's too much there, but for you guys to consider, but this is how we can approach Freemasonry, that it is complex. I try to make it as simple as possible to my visitors, but to see the enthusiasm within the organization, an enthusiastic person, not just a young guy, I'm no longer that, but someone who's enthusiastic, but not culty, someone who knows what they're talking about, but not filled with sauce, pouring sauce all over the cheese. I think that people respect that and they want to know Freemasonry matters. When we have the narrative of like, oh, we used to be great, and George Washington was a Mason, and my grandfather was too, and we're going to lose this building, or we used to have 8,000 members, now we have 200, but we're still great guys, join us. That's not a good soapbox to be on. I think to get people excited about that, we do believe in our own power. We do believe that fraternal values, the tenets, still matter in society, although we're not like a frontier anymore. That when we have so many people separated by distance and religion, politics, or their cell phones, the technological divide that I think a lot of younger guys, and this is something I really am serious about, it became a hipster joke that, they're, with the beards and, the greased hair and everything and the suspenders, that actually is a cry for authenticity and the belief that the past has a spice to it, that there was some sort of authenticity to what people did because they had to make things themselves. They had to make their own soap. They had to make their own communities, right? I think to pick up on that, to really let people enjoy that. That's why I like talking about the frontier. I like talking about, especially on the California frontier, and how Freemasonry played a part of that. And so
we have a question from one of our brothers, Jerry Johnston with Lexington Lodge 1. He says, aside from the monetary value, how important is and how do you begin to discover the provenance of a historical item?
Good question. That's the first thing I look at. I don't look at the monetary value. That comes later. And really, if it's that old, and a lot of them don't really. I know that you could say, well, Adam, everything has a price. That's a real cynical approach to history. It's like I said, it's here because it's here. It's really worth nothing unless it has provenance. And so let's pick on the George Washington Bible. It's a Bible. It has pages. It's from a specific time that gives it some sort of historical import and some monetary value. But the fact that George Washington laid his hands upon it when he took his oath as the very first president of anything in the world, that makes it priceless. It makes it almost a relic of near religious proportions, right? So these things are just papers, they're just photographs, but the value you add on to it. So that is hard to find provenance. So you find out who made it, who it belonged to. In many cases with some of these books, they loved writing their names all over the place, especially on pages they shouldn't be, like the title page or the frontispiece. And then sometimes, in fact, with old collections like ours that have been squirreled away in rabbit warrens, something's been donated and the paperwork doesn't exist. We just don't know sometimes. And the provenance, the trail goes dead. And then we kind of have to just sit on it until we can figure something out, if at all. And if there's no provenance of who owned it after the originator, then that's the provenance, and that's who we center, we pick up on.
On
I
a
don't know if
simple,
that answered the question, but I would say look at who it's addressed to. If it depends on what it is. If it's a photograph, that's difficult because, as you know, on Masonic photographs, they just never put any names on the back sometimes, at least in my experience. So you'll have to figure out what era that came from. You have to kind of become an expert in a lot of different things. If it's a certificate, the name, who's the Grand Secretary at the time. That way, at least you find some context if the provenance trail has gone dead. So,
good. On a similar thread, what is the most unique, unexpected, or valuable item that you personally have discovered or come across?
I mean, coming in, I didn't hear that part.
The most unique, unexpected, or valuable item, historical Masonic item that you personally come across? What would you say that is?
That is a really hard question. It really is, because I've seen a lot. In the collections, I'll take this to be in the collections that I've managed.
Okay.
One of the finest things I will never forget it as a seventh generation Californian. This is something, and in fact, this item had a family connection in a small way, but I located through Facebook, a friend of mine wrote me, this is several years ago, and said, "Hey, this trowel is going up for sale. Do you guys want to take a look at it?" And she knew the guy, and he wanted a crazy amount of money, and we were able to negotiate this on the basis that this was a historical treasure. It was essentially the trowel that laid the cornerstone of the first San Francisco City Hall that took 19 years to build and 20 seconds to knock down. The family connection is that my like third cousin, once or twice removed, had been mayor of the city during the earthquake, Eugene Schmitz. So he had been in that building, but I had obtained the original trowel of a building that did not exist, but is legendary. We also had, from the same Grand Master, the trowel that laid the cornerstone of the old California Mint. These, you can say, oh, these are just buildings. When your municipality gets a mint, that's a big deal. When you build a very flawed but very beautiful city hall building, you're going on the map, especially if your city is known as the Paris of the West. So that was so incredible, and it was made by a very famous silversmith, and it was double stamped in a weird way, which indicated to this appraiser that he may have forged it, and all sorts of other fun stuff. And it had a walrus ivory handle with the original seal of San Francisco. When we exchanged when we gained possession of that, I was able to basically show it. If you've ever been in the Grand Lodge of California, there's a whole wall that's an open, it's kind of a window where you could see the southern part of the city of San Francisco. And I was able to just kind of display it like some sort of Excalibur to the city because it had been lost. These items disappear. Californiana, especially from this period, much of it remains in private collections. They occasionally bubble to the surface, and then they quickly disappear because they're very collectible, especially if it comes from the earthquake period. I won't be untoward if I call it. It's known as disaster porn, and so people will collect that sort of stuff. And so we were so lucky to get it, and it was one of the finest things as a Californian. Another was to work on the exhibit, the permanent exhibit at the Columbia State Park. It's a replica lodge hall that has its own interesting history of why it looks the way it does, and who was involved in it. And that was because I'd gone to that place since I was a kid. So there's several different instances, being able to finally get into the records of Benicia Lodge, which formed the corpus of my last giant research project, and I'm still sort of working on Benjamin Hyam. So there are several different instances of, very small items to big ones, but the trowel was one of the finest ones. I had a really good time with that. And I would take these trowels to they had the San Francisco History Expo. It was put on by the San Francisco Historical Society, and it was set up in the old mint. So you had, I don't know, 40 or 50 different historical organizations or organizations with histories, and we would display our wares. But I was the only one there who had the trowel that laid the cornerstone of this very, very important building. This mint, by the way, had more gold than Fort Knox at one point. It survived the earthquake, luckily. So I was in a room with the Odd Fellows and Native Sons, and so we dubbed that the Fraternal Gulch. That was a lot of fun. I did that for about 6 years. So all of these things combined form this kind of identity I have as a Freemason, but also as a Californian with whose family has a long history in the state. And it's so much fun to be able to work with a history that I also have a connection to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's
and there's
great.
a couple Californians here today that can attest to that. I could spend all night on this.
No, that's great. Obviously, you're very passionate about this. So the hour is drawing long, but I have one final question for you, and then we're going to proceed with the final slides. This is more of a crystal ball question for you. So you are a very wise historian. So what will future historians garner or learn or consider provenance from our current time period, say 100 years from now?
When you say our, are you talking about Masonic or just
Masonic?
our entire
Masonic.
culture? Okay.
Masonic.
That's difficult to say because we've gotten a lot more press than we have in the past, and that's due to, groundbreaking works from historians like Margaret Jacob and others. But will we be taken seriously? Can we take ourselves seriously? I know that Freemasonry or Masonic history is trendy in the fraternity right now, but I really do think it's time for those who are interested in it to take it seriously. It's not hokey. It's something that we can write this future, right? If we take it seriously, and not as well, who knows? It's up for us to discover in this kind of historical hokey wish-wash, is to really seriously look at questions and try to find the answers. And I always tell brothers, it's not the biggest, don't ask too big of questions. It may be enough that you can determine, in order to understand Freemasonry, I believe you can really find out in your lodge itself, in the records of the lodge. And that's not to say that there are no deep secrets. There are, but I think it lies within our dedication to fraternity, our agape, our brotherly love. Mm-hmm. And that's what forms communities, and to take that seriously, because that's how we form our culture, to look to the past, to move to the future. That's cliche, but we'll never be able to replace or replicate the artwork that we love so much, that they left behind. So what do we put in the future? And that's really, it's hard for me to say. To keep those who can write, to do that, those who are serious about other kinds of research, any other kind of discipline, to indulge yourself in that, to look at the hard questions, but to try to localize it, find the humanity in it before because you can lose yourself in the esoteric. I'm not saying that's not a thing, but I'm saying that you can lose yourself in it if you forget the humanity of it. So that's my crystal ball, is to take it seriously, and that these things do matter, to support it, to don't let it drop off. When somebody says, hey, let's turn this room into a meeting room because we need the space. Well, we have lots of space. so you're going to throw something in the trash or put it into storage. Why not, when you say go through it, to dedicate the time to do it? Don't give someone a month or a week. I've had to do these things, to allow the time necessary to call in experts, or if that word is too strong, to call in those who are in the know. There are resources to understand the fraternity, to understand our culture, not just in cliche, but in hard facts with evidence.
Yeah.
And I mean, I often say again, the stories of the people who wrote the books, I think, are sometimes more interesting than the books themselves. So
Right.
I don't know if that was crystal ball, but that's pretty much here and now.
That was a great answer. So we can write this future. Not only can we, but we are writing the future as we speak. So excellent presentation. Thank you for joining us tonight, Worship Brother Adam, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, brothers. Really appreciate it. It's been a real great honor, and I hope to talk to you all soon.
Definitely. So, brothers, we have a few more slides, and before we proceed to close, next month, our meeting will be on Monday, August 28th, 7 p.m. Worship Brother Bizak, we have finalized our speaker for that evening?
We have not, brother. We're waiting on a schedule.
Okay. So you'll be surprised. If you are interested in furthering your Masonic knowledge, of course, we are strong proponents of the Philalethes Society, and I believe our guest speaker here this evening could probably say a few good things about the Philalethes Society. So, where's Brother Adam? Would you like to do that?
Yeah, well, both John and I can, since we're both officers of it. The Philalethes is and this is not cliche, it is the oldest independent Masonic research body. What does that mean? I mean, there's been a lot. Quater Coronati is the oldest lodge of research, not a research lodge, but Philalethes cut through Grand Lodge red tape and kind of, it's the American version, I suspect, of QC or QCCC, but it's away from the Grand Lodge system and tries to unite all brothers in their pursuit of Masonic light. The journal has been in publication since 1928. It's had its peaks and valleys, let's just say, but it is entirely worth subscribing to, especially for the last 8 or 9, maybe longer than that, 10, 12 years now, that Sean Iyer, who's also a California Mason as well as a Virginia Mason, he has been editing it, and he's just done a phenomenal job. The fact that when the society had its, again, it had its peaks and valleys, the fact that brothers stuck by it means it's testimony to the belief in not just the organization itself, but what it stands for. That it's such a paragon of Masonic research. So when you are a subscriber or a member, you'll see a lot of guys that still put MPS after their names. It means something to them. It's really kind of cool. Or when you become a fellow, that is a thing in our own Masonic world. So it has, its standards are very high. And not that they're so daunting. None of these research organizations to which I work with, be it Philalethes, Scottish Rite Research Society, or Quater Coronati and its publication, they have high standards, but are high standards what we stand for? And that they're not so daunting, because you will quickly find out that myself, John, others like us that are interested and that want to do more with it will help each other, help write each other's papers, to give advice, to lend an ear. And that's really cool, because it shows Freemasonry as that center of learning, that didn't exist at certain periods in human society, to have an organization that's dedicated to self-improvement, but not just that, to have brothers there, a group of people that can be there with you. And the pursuit of knowledge is something I think that we're all engaged in. So there's my pitch for the Philalethes, that it is one of several, but it's one of the ones you should definitely join. So as a historian, I have to, I don't have to, but it's any profession, I don't care what it is, you're kind of expected to belong to certain trade subscribe to trade organization or trade magazines, et cetera. And there's ones that you probably just should do that, right? This is one of them. So and not because you have to, but because you definitely should. You'll want to subscribe to it.
Mhm.
So there are several articles within each issue. It comes out quarterly. There's artworks. So anything to interest the average Freemason. But again, like I described earlier on, to walk away feeling like they got something out of it, something genuine, something really authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a tremendous digital library, which is searchable as well.
Mhm.
That comes with membership, should you so choose. So
Yes.
to learn more about that, you can go to RubiconMasonicSociety.com/Philalethes or Google Philalethes Society, and it'll take you right to it. We have some good news coming up. The transactions, in case you weren't aware, it's a real thing. We're finally about to prove it to you. Fingers crossed. So Dan or John, would you mind sharing some good news about our transactions?
Go ahead, Dan.
Our transactions are, in fact, a real thing. We hope to have them available on August 18th and 19th, the weekend of our festive board and conference. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing moves fast in Freemasonry, especially publishing. So we're getting there. Thank you, Dan. Brothers, if anyone has not seen the Masonic table, we'd love for you to check it out. You can check it out on Amazon Prime. If you need us to mail you a circular flat disc, we can do that too. Just reach out to us. We think you'll enjoy it. We put a lot of time and effort into it. And the Masonic table is basically going to be reenacted, but in this time, real time for real Masonic education and fellowship at the conference and festive board in 2023. So if you have not RSVP'd or signed up, strongly encourage you to do that. This will be a festive board you do not want to miss. So if you have any interest in helping to support Rubicon Masonic Society, there's a QR code, or you can go to RubiconMasonicSociety.com/donate. Every little bit helps. So thank you. Are there any final comments from anyone here tonight? Worship Brother Adam, you left us speechless. So thank you.
Stunned.
Appreciate it very much. Worship Brother Dan, will you please do the honors, my friend, of delivering a closing devotion?
Brothers, our closing prayer this evening is again taken from the 1947 edition of the Indiana Masonic Monitor. Supreme Grand Master, ruler of heaven and earth, we are now about to separate and return to our respective places of abode. May the blessings of heaven rest upon us and all regularly made Masons. May brotherly love prevail. May every moral and social virtue unite and cement us. Amen.
Be.
Brothers, thanks for joining us. Our next meeting is August 28th, 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll send out an email blast the morning of. If you know of anybody that would like to attend, please ask them to go to RubiconMasonicSociety.com/RSVP. Until next time, brothers, may we always be happy to meet, sorry to part, and very happy to meet again. We'll talk to you soon.